fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCOQ 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Well, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Dave Martino is back from Mission Impossible 17.
Yeah, 27.
27?
27. No, it's actually number 7. Right.
Number 7.
Yeah.
Wow.
7.
So you could put them all together and be like 14, 15, even longer, more hours.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you could spend your life watching those films.
Now, this is part 1. So is this really, does it really cut off and make you go, oh my God, and you can't wait for part 2? Is that, I'm just curious if they left you with a big cliffhanger here.
Well, to some extent, they did. But they tied things up enough, and now we just have to wait till next year to find out what happened.
Is he on the verge of death? Is that it? He's hanging from a rope somewhere? And
No, but I don't want to give any spoilers.
I don't like the audience. Who cares? They know I don't like them. Come on. You know, it's my desirable meanness that they like. Anyway.
They always say nice things about you.
No, they don't. No, I still got more bad things than you do, but that's all right. You're getting up there. Keep it up.
I'm getting there. I'm trying.
Keep up the good work. You'll win the award for the end of the year here. You know. Well, I think I'm going to go see Barbie instead of Mission.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I'll be your Barbie girl.
I'm going to wait for Barbie 7.
Barbie 7. I don't think one is going to make it, but that's just my opinion. Nobody cares, you know. But, anyway. So now today we have got an author with us, and her new book is called Love the Sinner. Sounds like it's written about me. So here we go. So let's welcome Moshaty. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. How are you?
Well, you know, I'm not bad. I mean, the biggest problems I've got is deciding which movie to go see. So I'm not doing too bad, right?
I am actually, my birthday is Friday, and I am seeing both Oppenheimer and Barbie back to back.
Wow.
I'll tell you, the nuclear bomb, and then Barbie. Like
you got to end with brevity, I would assume. So that's why Barbie is the tail end.
I don't understand that. I mean, the other one's going to be all serious, over 3 hours.
Yeah,
intense,
and you got to lighten the mood.
And then you got to go watch Barbie.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sort of lost, you know. I guess I'm miserable because I'm just staying home. I'll let Dave do it. Dave's going. He'll be in the lineup with you. He's going to go watch it.
That's fine. You can watch it when it comes out on video and streaming services.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Don't give him your ducats and dollars now. Just
no.
tight.
Well, you know, I don't mind the idea, but you see, the problem is, I mean, the real truth is, the Oppenheimer is over 3 hours, and I'm 61. So, you know, I've got to use the bathroom 3, 4, 5 times in an hour. How am I going to sit through 3 hours of that in the theater?
It's definitely going to give you Braveheart back. So you're going to need to stretch.
Yeah, it's terrible. Imagine if you had hemorrhoids. I mean,
you come prepared for those things, I would assume.
Well, I know, but
let's put it to the audience, I guess.
It just seems rather uncomfortable to me. But I mean, you know, I'm sure it's going to be great. Are you going to go see it in the IMAX too, or?
I am just seeing it in. I think it's like some sort of very fancy sound. I think that's what I'm doing. But I'm going to a theater that has like the reclining Barca loungers. Oh. So I'm just going to lay back and watch 3 hours of the film. And then lay back and watch an hour and a half of Barbie. So.
Fancy stuff. I know someone that cleans those recliners, and I wouldn't want that job.
No, that's all right.
No. So what is this all about here? Now you've got the book Love the Sinner. So this is, the name in itself says a lot. But so tell us, what's the premise of this book?
So the premise of this book is actually, it's a short story collection, and it is full of 8 disquieting stories bound by sin. I understand that there are 7 deadly sins, but I have included 1 mortal sin in there at the top of the book. And what was really fun about putting this together is that my other hat is a behavioral science. So I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. So I work with, most of my clients are suffering from PTSD and CPTSD. And it's strange what us as human beings, will justify in the heat of the moment. So I feel like we are all guilty of all 7 sins, of the deadliest. And I think, in degrees, we're all capable of all of them. And what's fun about this book is that, yes, there are sins involved, but there is absolutely no devil at all in this book. It is all where man is the scariest monster, where, humans are doing the really odious things, and they're trying to, all along, really trying to justify their reasons for doing so. So it's a pretty fun book. I'm very proud of it.
So are you using your clients in this book?
I am not.
Oh, sure. You say that now.
I am not. Don't make me lose my livelihood, Al. I am not.
When you do that for a living, when you're writing a book like this,
Yeah,
it's going to have an influence on how you write your characters.
It does and it doesn't. And it's a funny, and not in a funny ha-ha sort of way, but it's a very interesting dissociation that you have to have, because, as any type of therapy, whether it's talk therapy, psychotherapy, you're dealing with a lot of very heavy subjects and having to do a lot of heavy lifting with helping people sort through those types of things. And it really kind of takes you more inward, as to how you would handle the situation, or trying to figure out why people have put themselves into this position. And I think what's interesting, especially about horror, and I had a love of the horror genre from a very, very young age. What's interesting about it is that all of these stories, save for maybe a few factors within them, are all pretty plausible things. And I think that that's what's the scary thing, is the reality of how far we'll go to either get something done or get revenge, or keep our pride intact, things of that nature. I think it's very interesting to kind of look at it from 30,000 feet and just kind of be in awe of the capacity that we have to do the things that humans do.
Yeah. When you do a story, when you set up your characters to be in these situations where they have to decide on making, or, they have to make some sort of decision. That's kind of how I see it. Did you come up with the storyline first and then develop characters to fit in it? Or did you have these characters on the side already created and then you decided to put them in these situations?
Well, every story that I do is the idea is fully formed. So I have a lengthy outlining system. When I write, it's, the idea is this is the beginning and middle of the end. And I have that before I completely flesh out a story. And then I will kind of break the story down into however many acts the story has. Sometimes it's 3-act story. Sometimes it's a 5-act story. But I'll write what needs to happen in each act of the story, and then I will flesh out the story from there. So everybody already has a character name. We've already got a title. We already know what the ending is. And I say we as my my left and right brain working together, my scientific and just my fun horror brain. But I have that extensive piece because it makes it really easy for me to write. And it also makes it easy for me to kind of flesh out in between if I want to have like a B story or kind of like a side quest for the character to have and then get back on track. I'm able to do that very, very easily with the outline. So it's a lot of fun. It's stuff that people don't ever see or get to read, but it definitely helps me flesh out the characters really, really well.
Well, I'd imagine, but when you write them as short stories, you have to make sure that your words really count.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because you can't just, you're not going on and you're not going into big history descriptions of how this person grew up and why this and why that. So you got to be very precise. People have got to know your characters fairly fast as compared to a regular novel.
Yes. I mean, tell that to Stephen King, because he even does that in his short stories.
Yeah.
Does give them a full world and a backstory, but he's Stephen King, he can do that now. But yeah, you really have to, with short stories, especially if you are, trying to stay in a particular word count, which a lot of short story anthologies do, which is a collection of stories of a lot of authors. Sometimes it's 10, 20 authors that are writing a story, and you have to stay within the constraints of whatever word count they give you. But also trying not to stay too long. The best advice I've ever gotten on writing a short story is arrive as late as possible and leave as early as possible. And even if that means not resolving the story fully, because there's nothing scarier and horror with not really knowing what the ending is, or having something be very ambiguous and chilling, is also like an additional character. So it really works well. But yeah, when you are writing short, you don't have a lot of time to hang around and describe the scenery or, take them back to a big thought that they had. So it does make you if you can be as concise as possible, and also, leave your flowery language at the door, I think, because people will kind of lose track, especially if you're just being a little too verbose in order to just kind of fill words. And readers can usually tell when you're just trying to take up space.
How do you create your outline? Do you use any particular tools? Do you have a method?
Yeah, I use a pen and a notebook.
That's very simple.
Let me write this down.
I know. And I'm so analog with stuff. I wish I could say that it's like, oh, I use this website or, this Google Doc. I don't. I really get, every story that I have, my house is flooded with notebooks, 1 subject, 5 subject notebooks, and I'll go and there's, I'll do the title, and what I write is short form. I have 2 other books coming out next year that are a volume 1 and a volume 2 of a series, and that's what I write. So I'll write my title, I'll write all my acts, and I'll kind of scribble in as I go along. So it's a very old school analog way to do things, but it works for me because I know I can always go back and reference, and I don't have to worry about, did I delete something, and sometimes you go back to an old idea where a story like just did not work until you confront it with a new idea. And then you still have that amalgamation to make, because you can pull up that old notebook and look at that old idea. So that's also worked for me. There's a story in Love the Sinner that was actually 2 stories that I combined into one, and that was a really, really fun exercise. And I was so proud that I still had that first notebook around, because I knew that there was a kernel of an idea somewhere that would definitely fit and expand the story that I was trying to create.
Well, what makes a good story for you?
Ooh, as a reader or a writer?
Well, both. If they're different, both. Sometimes it's the same. Yeah, give us a rundown.
I think as a reader, what makes a good story for me is I don't ever want to know where I'm headed. I think that and I've read stories where I'm just, you can figure out what's going to happen towards the end because, the play is a little obvious, or things are foreshadowed a little too heavy-handed, and I still enjoyed them. But I feel like the best stories I've read are stories where either the ending or the last, third of the story just hits you with a wallop, and you're just like, whoa, I didn't think we were heading there, or oh my God, like that's terrifying. Those are my favorite. And I have ones that I kind of go back to over and over, even though I know how they end. It's just the way that they're told and constructed are just really beautiful pieces of work. And I think as a writer, what makes a good story for me is just kind of reading it back and being really satisfied with the structure that I've given it. When you write something, and nothing has been truer than this for me in the last coming weeks. My book just came out on July 5th. Is when you put your book baby out into the world, right? And then I always think about it as, if you've ever seen those plastic surgery shows where the people come in and then they mark them all up with marker and all the things are going to change about them. That's kind of how it feels, putting a book out and saying, here's my baby. And please feel free to mark up my baby and tell me how ugly my baby is. And then tell me how you would improve my baby and make it the prettiest baby. And I think that that's what's been nice for me as a writer, having, reading it back and being like, this was a good story. This was fun. Like, I had fun putting this together. And you have to find the joy in it, because sometimes writing is incredibly isolating, especially as an author. You're very isolated from, it's not like you're writing as a group, or sometimes people don't have any people to have ideas to bounce off of. So when you finally get there and you're just like, everything I did for this story, everything I omitted or everything I added made it what it is now. And it's a really satisfactorily good story.
Yeah, I've been isolated in the old age home now for about 6 years.
That's too bad.
No, it's better for everyone. Really,
it is.
And now, what's your idea of horror? Like, are you the suspense, scary sort of mental horror, or are you more into having violence within the scenes?
I like it all, really. I mean, I feel like there's only a few things that I don't really, really like, because I'm also an avid horror film fan from a very, very young age. I think the only things that I don't like, or maybe I don't want to say I don't like them because I've powered through them, I guess. The only things that I don't like are, I think, just like gratuitous assault for the purpose of just being gratuitous assault. It's not adding anything to the story. And there's a lot of, early slasher films that are like that. One that comes to mind is the Toolbox Murders, which is like incredibly just graphic, staying too long on scenes where you just really don't need to. And, you worry about the mental health of the actresses after that film. But for my favorite horror is always going to be psychological horror. I love like a mind meld in horror, especially psychological horror seems to be the most relatable, I think, because we've all been kind of messed with. I mean, that's why pranks work, because they play on our mind. And, you put that prank in a horrific or terrifying situation, it's very effective. It's very effective very quickly. And it also stays with you. It kind of follows you home a little bit. So that's hands down probably going to be my favorite horror genre, because there's millions of subgenres to horror, which I absolutely love. Or
do you stay conscious of violence and how you put it on the page?
Yeah, I personally do. I think that there is torture and violence in my book, if anyone's looking for that.
I thought you were going to say in my life.
If you're in the market, there is there in the book, but I'm very mindful of why it's there. It has to be purposeful. There's one story that is incredibly torture heavy, because that's the nucleus of the story. That's what the whole story is kind of spinning around. And I find that really purposeful. But if, it's in some genres, especially literary, are there to be aggressively violent. I mean, that's their genre. And I feel like that's great if you can write in that genre. It's not something that I'm capable of, at least not yet. I think I don't want to flex that for myself yet, just because I have that fear of, and especially knowing what I do, working with people through PTSD and not wanting to kind of, emotionally capitalize on that. I think I like to just kind of stay what my lane is right now. And maybe that's something I'll explore at a later time.
So your characters, what kind of relationship do you have with your characters? And I ask this because we get so many different responses. Some people hear them, some people see them, some say it's like a movie's, it's voices, and some consider their characters their friends or family and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. How do you describe your situation?
I think I always see, just because I started out in screenwriting as a screenwriter, so everything is always very visual for me. And that, I think that comes across in my literary work as well, in the way I describe a scene or just describe my character's actions or motions. But I think that it's always kind of a movie scene, and I always kind of think of them as not necessarily friends, but these are unfortunately, these are people that I know. And I say unfortunately because we've all had to
we all have family.
Yeah, we all have a family. So I think we all know how to feel about this. But it is, and that's a great analogy for it. It definitely feels like a family reunion where you're around people that you need to be around, because there's a means to an end. But I also, from my screenwriting side, there's also not a line of dialogue in the stories that I haven't said aloud. And I think that's really important to make sure, at least for myself when I'm writing, that whatever's being said is not just an ugly collection of words. It might sound pretty when it's written on the page, but if somebody is reading it, a lot of us are internal dialogue readers. So we're hearing our own voice read the story. And if you're jumbling over the words because it's just such an ugly pattern, or it's just too verbose or too much, it's going to take the reader out of it. So I'm always very cognizant of, does this dialogue even flow? Right. Does this being said in the character's voice, now that we know who the character is and their motivations and whatnot, is this something that they would say? So I always try to be very aware that I don't take my reader out of it by what I'm trying to put on the page.
Well, I was surprised to learn that, 20 to 50% of people have no internal dialogue. Yeah. They can't hear themselves think. And I was just wondering, but it sounds like, yeah, it's really strange. But it sounds like you can hear your characters.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And that may be where I need to see a therapist.
Right. Also, me too.
Neither hither nor thither. But yeah, I was just hearing that fact a couple years ago, and I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't have an it? Like, what? I couldn't figure, I could not wrap my brain around it. And I was sitting there like, how do you think? How do you make decisions? If you don't sit there and argue with yourself in the shower, if you're not, talking to yourself throughout your entire house all day, it boggles my mind. But I mean, science, man, I guess that's where we're at. But yeah, I can definitely hear all of my characters, especially there is a character at the story that closes the book is the longest story in the book, and there's a character in there that I adore, and he has a very distinct voice in my head, and from a distinct character from a very favorite show of mine, Deadwood, from a long time ago, and I absolutely love hearing that, and I've tried to emote that, and it's pretty terrible. It sounds like Scrooge McDuck. It's not great, but I love hearing them, and I love kind of working that out. I just think it's important to make sure that, your dialogue sounds good.
Right. But do they tell you to do weird things?
They do not.
No, they're not,
I think I'm safe.
Well, that's good. That's good. Just checking to see if you should be allowed out in public.
Yeah, it's okay. It's good to have someone thank you for having my back.
Well, just making sure, keep everyone safe here.
You do.
Hey, listen, so what happens to your characters then when you're done? The book's done. The book's out. It's over. Do they continue with you, or do you just cut them off and say, I've, been there, done that, bye?
Oh, I would love for the character that I just mentioned to end up in another story. I just don't think he's done. I may have a chronicle, have to do like the chronicles of, X character. Because he was one of the characters that was just so fully formed and just so real and vivid before I even began the story. Like I knew I wanted them to have this persona and this kind of like swagger to them and this huge personality that kind of eats the story. So hopefully they will stick around, but everyone else, I feel like they've completed their mission and we're ready to kind of move move on from them and let them be in the world that they're in.
So with these kinds of stories and, by the sounds of it, there is a meaning behind each story. There is like a subtext or something that you want the person to become aware of or
Yes.
realize. I think that's my guess. Is this true?
Yes. So each story begins with just kind of like a peek into who the character is. And it's usually the character kind of at their highest level of where they are in that sin. So each story is represented by a sin. Each main character is either living through that sin, creating that sin, or the product of that sin. And the first page you read before you get to the story gives you a little bit of a peek into their psyche, really. Just to kind of prepare you for who you're going to deal with before you get into it, which I thought was that actually kind of happened by not necessarily like it's kind of a happy mistake. It started with the first story, which is called A Battle Between Boys. And it was, how do I start the story with this kind of inner dialogue, or do I just kind of start the book with that? And I just started the book with it. And then I said, every character in this book has something to say, that has nothing to do with the story, that has nothing to do with what they're going to go through during, the actions through the story. Like, how can I give them a little bit extra room to breathe? And that's what we did. We started off with just kind of giving you a little insight into who they are and how they operate before you jump in. And I think that was a lot of fun, and it might be something that I kind of carry through it as a branding, I guess, because it was a lot of fun to do and to delve into.
So with each one of these stories, when you go through it, do you find that you change somewhat as a writer?
Yeah. And that was a question that was put to me a few weeks ago was, when you're writing these, how do you stay within the story? I think for me, every story is very self-contained. When you put a book together in whatever software program you're using, it's usually, you start a story, then the next story comes right after that, and you can keep scrolling upwards and look at everything. But before I really built the book and put it together in the order that it's in, I needed to write each story as if it was not going to be in a book. If I was submitting it to an anthology, and the story had to absolutely stand on its own two legs, and not be thematic. And I think that was a challenge for me to say, how can I make this story matter to someone, and what has to change within the story? Because it's easy to have, this is a collection about, ghost stories, and every story has a ghost in it. But how do you make your one ghost story stand out of 20 other ghost stories? So I had to be really diligent and kind of redirect the way I was outlining and kind of reverse engineer it. What is the feeling that I want to provoke at the end? Okay, we're going to start there and then work backwards. So there was a lot of stories that I wrote backwards for this book, because it was, writing chronologically, you tend to add too much and kind of circle the airport before you get to the point. And I knew that was happening with a few of the stories. So I said, okay, well, what is my best course of action? I want people to really hate this person at the end of the story. Because not a lot of these characters are likable. And I think that that's real life. Not everybody is a great guy. Not everybody, has a happy ending. And I think that that's so real to life, that I had to coincide with, okay, you're not going to be able to write this straight through. So it definitely gave me a new skill, I guess. So changing me as a writer that way, was learning how to write an effective story backwards.
Well, I'm wondering, do you sometimes write backwards because your characters might take over and kind of, take the plot off the rails?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Because they can, and you're just like, I want them to explore this, and this would be a funny conversation, or or I could, have this conversation and we could do a little exposition here and not have to like explain and add a chapter. But you get off the rails quick, especially when you're writing psychological horror, because it's easy to try to go explore another avenue of either the character's brain or who they're dealing with or their own motivations. It's so easy to get lost in the quicksand. So yes, definitely. And I can learn very quickly when it's going to be one of those stories. And like I said, I have a 2-book collection coming out next year that also has a few stories that had to be written backwards because I was just like, where is this headed? Where are we going? Because we've lost the plot entirely. So that's been, I'm glad that I had that skill to fall back on with it.
Wow.
So when you're doing this, and going through the process and putting together the stories and stuff, have you ever come or started writing, and when you hit a certain point, you don't like what you're writing and you don't use the story? Like, has that ever happened to you?
Yes, it has. And like I said, that I was so happy to have that old notebook where I had one of those stories that was just like, this is such a great idea, but I just cannot, there's something in the story that is not allowing itself to execute it. And I think that's important to kind of keep them around. I love kind of it's like when you have, you're telling somebody a story or telling somebody a plot to a movie that you can't remember. And you know what it is, and you've seen it, and you liked it, and then you're trying to explain it to someone else, and they're just glazing over. They just don't get it. That's kind of how it is to have a story that, you feel very deeply, and it just doesn't work. And you have to be okay with like putting it away and saying, you know what, this is not your time to like live this book life yet. And that's okay. And some stories are never going to make it. And there's complete stories that I have that I absolutely love the idea to, that have just never found a home. I've submitted them, dozens of places, and it's always been, not now, but I can still absolutely love that story, but know that maybe just in this notebook is the only place that you're going to live. And that's okay too.
Now, do you find that you have to be in a certain mood or place in your mind in order to write these stories, or can you just sit down and go anytime you're free?
I wish I was consistent about it, because there's some times where I say, okay, well, we're gonna write today. We need to do 2 stories today. We have got to get them out, and I'm really effective with it. Some days I shine real bright, and some days it's like, well, that's 400 words, and now we're gonna go watch like 4 reruns of The Golden Girls because I don't have anything else in me to give today. And I've been really, really dry for stories. Sometimes I haven't written anything in like a few weeks. And that's, it's hard to find the inspiration when it starts to feel like a job. And I think that's with anything, and you lose kind of the creative juice from it. But I feel like the thing that gets me back on track is reading other people's stories or watching films that I admire. And something kind of clicks in my brain to say, oh, I like how they did that. And I'm going to try to either put that nuance in my story, or that gave me an idea for where I was running blank on it. But I'm not a consistent writer. It just kind of is what it is. It took me probably about 6 months to write Love the Sinner. And I started writing it in November, beginning of November of 2021. And I finished in almost the end of March, early April 2022. I submitted it and got a contract for it in July. So it was a baby. It was a baby book. Like it was just born, and then I sent it out. But it did take me a while to kind of get that together, and that's, to me, seems like a long time, half of a year, to try to write books. And spending time around a lot of authors as a new author that are drilling out 100,000+ word novels, sometimes 3 or 4 times a year, and I do not have that type of stamina as of yet. I will let you know when I get there, because it's not anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah, drink more coffee.
Can't. Cannot.
Well, I'll tell you, but being in behavioral science
Mm-hmm.
and let's say the last 3-5 years and stuff, and looking at the way people have behaved over, let's say, the pandemic and politics and life and all that in the U.S. and even the world. But when you look at that, has it changed your opinion of people, or can you understand why people act the way they do so much so, like as we've seen?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I feel like there is right now, currently, there is such a cycle of all behavior is acceptable behavior. And, we're kind of regardless of consequence, where we're making concessions for things that we would not have even 5 years ago. Hate speech or things that are directed at particular groups, or things that are just very volatile in nature. I feel like that it's kind of been given a pass because everyone is, we all went through a global event where everyone was angry and everyone was scared and everyone was petrified and everyone was very cautious. And I think that we've been kind of caught in that whirlwind where, don't you know how upset I am? Or don't you know how angry I am? And you should understand how disgruntled I feel. I think that it's an interesting dynamic to watch globally, because as much as we say it's an American problem, it's definitely a global problem.
Yeah.
As we've noticed, just kind of watching the news and kind of watching it quietly, spread across the map. And not to say that we're ground zero for any of it, but it's just to quietly go across. But as a behavioral therapist, and especially someone who teaches people emotional reactivity, it's been I wouldn't say very difficult, but it's been a little slower going, because when you have to look at emotional reactivity or how you react to a situation, there's a level of accountability you have to have for your own emotions in order to look at that and say, that's a wrong behavior, or that's a behavior that's not helping me, and pivot to something different. It's that accountability piece that's the slower piece, because you can't make the change, right? If somebody tells you, oh, Dave, that's a bad habit, until you feel that it's a bad habit, you're not going to see where people are saying that's a bad habit. So that accountability piece has been really slow with getting people to kind of change their verbiage or their motivations for things. So yeah, it's definitely given me a new perspective on people, especially from an accountability standpoint, because nobody really seems to want to do that these days.
No, and it must be kind of bizarre when you have to deal with people, because you never know where they're based at. Because, I mean, it's crazy. We've got people out there running around the world's flat and into conspiracies and kind of crazy and going really, really, really off into weird ideas. And I mean, I wouldn't want to deal with that on a professional basis.
I mean, I will say predominantly my clientele are people that mostly people that have gone through trauma or assault survivors. So it's that type of behavioral analysis, or even that type of emotional reactivity, comes with also like a lot of shame attached to it. So sometimes, they are nothing but accountability, because they blame themselves for things. So it's, getting that weird juxtaposition of folks that don't want to take accountability, coming from, an aspect where, 80% of your clientele used to be too accountable. And taking the ownership of things that weren't really theirs. It's been not necessarily entirely too challenging, but it's definitely been an exercise in patience and kind of understanding, I guess, to the point where everyone is handling things much differently than they were 4 years ago from an emotional standpoint.
Right. 4 years ago, they would just get drunk.
Yeah. Why don't you just drink like everyone else?
I'm telling you. Yeah. So what are your inspirations then in writing?
Ooh, oh, my inspirations are, from other author standpoints, I've always been obsessed with Ray Bradbury's work from very, very young. Rod Serling's work, because I think that both of them were very, very good at world building in a very short period of time. Ray Bradbury wrote a short story every day of his life from the age of 11 till the day he died. Like, it's just, that is also a stamina that I do not possess. But I think in that exercise, he was so adept at arriving late and leaving early and just really dropping you into the story. And that's something that I've learned to do effectively for myself. My longest story at the end of the book does take a little longer to get into, not necessarily learning about the character, but they are reciting something very chronological that's very important to them. So you have to kind of stay in that timeline. But they've been really inspirational to me. Obviously, Stephen King was really inspirational to me. Shirley Jackson, her humor in her writing, especially in her horror writing, is so brilliant, because you don't realize that sometimes in that humor that she's making really unlikable people likable and funny, and you kind of want to root for the bad guy in her stories. I think that makes it really fun, and that's something that I try to incorporate with my characters for Love the Sinner, because like I said, not all of them are somebody you'd want to go out and hang out with or have a drink with. They're people that, have very ill intentions, or they're just not, likable people. And it's kind of fun to see them kind of fall and get their just desserts. But also the brevity is important, especially when you're dealing with psychological horror. You don't want to keep people suspended in that kind of mental landscape for too long, because then people will kind of get lost. But I think that those three really, other inspirations are obviously, I love Clive Barker's films. I love his writing, and he's probably one of the new things now is emo horror or emotional horror. And that's like your Haunting of Hill House and Haunting of Bly Manor. Like, Mike Flanagan is an absolute genius at emotional, sad horror. But I think that Clive Barker was one of the first ones that I would probably attach that tag to, because his stories are very visceral and emotionally charged, and sad, quite sad. And I think that that's so also relatable, also makes psychological horror and body horror be very relatable and easily palatable to people who might not think that they are horror lovers.
So are you big on social media? Do people find Mo around?
Yeah, you can find Mo Moshaty on Twitter. That's where most of my writing stuff is. I'm actually also part of a co-producer, core member of Nick's Horror Collective. We are a women-led content media company, and we are working to elevate and celebrate diverse creatives. We have a film challenge that I think will be upticking again this year. We did it for 2021 and 2022. And we were, the Shudder channel was our streaming service for that. So we got to work with this horror giant of streaming services, and they really believed in our project. I'm also a part of Stowe Story Labs with Nix. We've created a fellowship for women identifying writers over 40 that are working in genre. Women over 40 in the writing and film industry there's tons of us, but we don't have the accessibility that men do. So it's very important for us to create that space. And I'm also a lecturer on horror cinema, especially trauma in horror cinema. So I've done that with Prairie View, Texas A&M. I do it a lot with Horror Bath Sig out of the UK, and especially Sheffield Hallam University out of the UK. And I just will be doing one next week. This Saturday, I'll be working with them for Fair 2000 Horror Uncaged, and I'll be speaking on race tropes and trauma within Black horror cinema. So All of that's on Twitter. I'm kind of everywhere. A little bit of a horror octopus.
Octopus. Now, do you have a website as well, or?
I do. It's just moshaty.com.
Well, that's a real easy one.
Super easy. You gotta keep it easy.
Gotta keep it easy. And this Stephen King guy, does he write horror?
He does. Who?
Yeah, Stephen King.
He's an up-and-comer. You might not have heard of him before.
Yeah, I couldn't find him on
author.
Amazon. So, yeah, I was just wondering. He mustn't have a deal yet, but...
no. He's trying, though.
Well,
Prodigy.
Keep it up. Just keep on pushing and it all works out.
Keep on pushing, it'll happen for you.
Yeah, just keep moving forward and don't
He
listen
doesn't
to...
even get edited anymore. He's that good. You wrote another one? Write directly to print, Stephen. Sweet.
Wow.
I want that kind of deal.
Oh, just do it. Dave's got one of those deals.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll write it.
Yeah. It works really well. So what's next for Mo? What's Mo going to do now?
Ooh, well, just going to keep promoting this book for the next 6 months. Because I then will start promotion on the next book that is going to come out in May of next year. So, yeah.
Are you working on projects? I mean, do you have, I always have 5 or 6 projects going at a time. And are you that type, or you do one at a time?
No, absolutely. I'm finishing up a 4th book right now. I am working on several projects. I do journalism for Fangoria's Terror Teletype, so I work with them as well. And then I'm working on a nonfiction book based on the horror cinema lecturing that I do. And I'm also writing a syllabus to bring that lecture to different colleges and university film programs across the country and beyond. So I'm always working on something.
Why don't you give that Stephen King a try and maybe do something with him and maybe help get his career going?
Yeah, that's completely unfeasible, but thank you for the vote of confidence.
I mean, give him a chance, the poor guy. I mean, he might not be that good, but
Stick with me, kid. You'll go places, Stephen.
Yeah, it takes time, that's all.
It does.
A little bit of time and effort, and soon he'll be doing a movie or something.
Just one.
Just one.
Movie.
Just one.
I mean, come on, let's not get too inflated here. We gotta
no, one movie, no franchises, absolutely none.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Anyway, well, we appreciate you coming on the show and talking about your writing and all that stuff. And of course, your newest book is called Love the Sinner, of course, which is a story about me. And of course,
unauthorized biography.
Yeah, that's it, almost identical. I know the cover on the book looks just like me, except for I think the cover, the skull there's got more hair than I do.
Possibly.
But it looks a little bit like a hippie. But that's okay. Anyway, and our guest has been Mo Moshaty. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Mo.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.